Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a look at the twisted legend of Hunter S. Thompson when I put Art Linson's Where the Buffalo Roam against Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Now, the thing about this one, we're going to do it a little differently than I do my normal videos because, like, both of these films, there's not really a plot, so to speak. So, we're not going to dissect the plot. What's more important for this video and how I came to this decision is what is the best representation of Hunter S. Thompson and who gave the best performances and that kind of stuff. So let's just look at both of them. We have Art Linson's Where the Buffalo Roam, which features Bill Murray as Hunter S. Thompson, and then Terry Gilliam's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which features Johnny Depp as Hunter S. Thompson. Now, comparing both of these performances, I would say they're pretty much even, because Bill Murray and Johnny Depp both hung out with Hunter S. Thompson in preparation for this role. And I would say they both went as method as the other one, because like Bill Murray did like his whole last season of Saturday Night Live as Hunter S. Thompson. And like Johnny Depp, he drove around in the car. Now, point that goes in Johnny Depp's favor is he actually made the hair look like, Bill Murray was already, he still has that weird receding widow's peak thing going on, but he doesn't go the full receding hairline like Johnny Depp does. Now, granted, most of the time in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Johnny Depp is wearing a hat, so you can't really. It's almost like a reveal when he takes off the hat. When he first takes off the hat, and you see him bald, and it's almost a shock because you don't really expect Johnny Depp to be bald. And the thing about Johnny Depp is he's I wouldn't say he's any more method than Bill Murray, but one thing he does have on Bill Murray is the fact that this motherfucker can like become every role that he does. Johnny Depp is like a modern day Lon Chaney, where like you step on a crack in Hollywood, it's probably Johnny Depp. You can there are certain roles that Johnny Depp plays that you can't really tell if it's Johnny Depp. Now, I would say that he definitely does that in Fear and Loathing. He definitely becomes Hunter S. Thompson, and the drug freakouts and everything are done to the hilt. Now, Bill Murray is one of the greatest comedic actors of all time, and he definitely puts more comedy into it than Johnny Depp does. Especially that one-on-one interview in the restroom with then candidate Richard Nixon. That is like pure comedic brilliance. And there's a few other times, like with the hospital scene and even the hotel room sequence with a Super Bowl Sunday and stuff. But then you look at his friend Dr. Laszlo, as he's called in Where the Buffalo Roam, and then Dr. Gonzo in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Peter Boyle plays Laszlo in Where the Buffalo Roam, and Benicio del Toro plays Dr. Gonzo in Fear and Loathing. And now Peter Boyle was one of the greatest actors of all time, especially the work that he did in the 70s was incredible. And this was kind of a bookend or a hell of a punctuation to a fire decade that started with the movie Joe. But he doesn't play it as good, in my opinion, as Benicio del Toro does in Fear and Loathing. Benicio del Toro in this, holding his own and even outshining Johnny Depp in this film. His Dr. Gonzo is just batshit crazy, and the look and everything. Dude even gained weight for this part. Granted, Peter Boyle already had the weight, so he didn't have to gain any weight, and the hair is all even. Because Peter Boyle always had that receding hairline. I very rarely ever saw that man with actual hair. Even in Taxi Driver, shit's all fucking gone on the top. But Benicio is far more crazy, like there is that sequence, that courtroom sequence in Where the Buffalo Roam, where it's just pure pandemonium, and that's par brilliance because the judge, played by R.G. Armstrong, he definitely does the thing that R.G. Armstrong does best, which is play a hammy asshole, but you don't, it's so inconsistent, whereas like Benicio del Toro's performance in Fear and Loathing is just, it never fucking stops. And of course, he has one of the fucking most quotable lines in that movie, and out of both of these movies. You took too much, man. You took too much. So that's already a point in favor of Fear and Loathing. And then also the representation of the time period. Now, the both movies boast an impressive soundtrack of the late 60s and early 70s that basically fit what's going on in the story or like the mindset of the characters. But Terry Gilliam puts the music in his film a lot better than Art Linson does, because like it for Fear or for Where the Buffalo Roam, it's kind of a checklist of like big hits of that time period. Now I would say the only time they really used the song to perfection was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, when Bill Murray gives Renee Auberjonois, probably fucked that all up, great, one of the great actors that was in a Robert Altman stock company, when he gives him that LSD on that airplane because he's this uptight businessman that's freaking out. And then and then you see Bill Murray in the cockpit of the airplane doing his thing, singing the song. That's done to brilliance. But there are many sequences in Fear and Loathing where the music is used to perfection. Most specifically, Bob Dylan's "Stuck Inside a Mobile" with those Memphis blues, and like that whole the chase scene where Gary Busey playing that highway patrolman that's chasing down Johnny Depp, a real brilliant sequence. And of course, Gary Busey, one of the greatest, most underrated actors of all time. But this is like after the motorcycle accident, so he's crazier than he was in most roles. But and that whole just back and forth between those two, just pure fucking brilliance. And of course, the use of Jefferson Airplane, the whole sequence where they're getting ready to throw, or Benicio del Toro wants Johnny Depp to throw the fucking radio into the bathtub when it peaks, when she hits that incredible note. And because of course Grace Slick, it was and still is an angel. She's still alive, and her voice was something that almost the defining a defining thing of that generation. Of course, the "Somebody to Love" is another one, and that whole sequence where he's got Flea in the bathroom and he's licking the fucking fragments of LSD off of his sleeve. There's just so many moments, and then we get to the representation of the drug use in the films, where like Where the Buffalo Roam has the drugs. They show you the drugs in the film, but you don't really get a sense of like how it is to be on drugs. There may be a couple of instances like when they're in the car and they got the vial of cocaine and they're doing little bumps. Well, more than little bumps, hefty bumps, we'll call them. And, that is a good representation of that kind of shit. But there's not a moment in Fear and Loathing that feels untrue, especially the representation of like honestly, that movie is the closest thing to being on acid without being on acid. The only other filmmaker to capture what it's truly like to be on hallucinogenics is probably Roger Corman with The Trip. And maybe that sequence an easy rider to a certain extent, but to have a whole movie that feels like one big trip, it's only Roger Corman and Terry Gilliam that have really just pulled that shit off. And that whole the sequence with the lizard people, that's pure Gilliam. Like, nobody but I honestly don't think anybody but Gilliam could have made that film, with the exception of maybe Fellini. But Gilliam was like, Fellini without all the pretension, I guess you could say, because Fellini didn't need LSD to make this kind of shit. And there are sequences that feel Fellini-esque, specifically the circus casino thing like that. Even the damn trapeze artists are called the Flying Fellinis. And of course, Terry Gilliam was a big fan of Fellini, and you definitely get that sense, the whole like blurring of reality and fantasy, which in this case is a drug trip, which there is truth to that reality that feels like fantasy, and he just puts you in it, and it's every single frame, like it just begins like a bullet. Like there's no slow opening credit sequence like there is in Where the Buffalo Roam. It does kind of start out that way, but all it does is once you hit that title card of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and then it goes to that quote from that doctor, and then just bam, they're fucking in the car, and they're, dude, it's a fucking ride. Like I said, this is the closest thing to being on these drugs without being on these drugs. That whole, even that sequence with the fucking adrenochrome, and it just like this movie is like, it outshines Where the Buffalo Roam in damn near every aspect. The only thing that Where the Buffalo Roam has on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is Bill Murray's performance as Hunter S. Thompson. Like, I think Johnny Depp might have took it a step further than Bill Murray, but it's hard to really decipher that, because you also see things in each movie that you don't see in the other one. Like you don't get to see Hunter S. Thompson's cabin like in Fear and Loathing. You see it in Where the Buffalo Roam in the beginning and the end of the film, and those are some of the best sequences of the film, especially that ending note of it just hasn't got weird for me. It just hasn't got weird enough for me. You know, this could always get weirder. But the one thing that Fear and Loathing has on Where the Buffalo Roam is you get more of the man as a poet. You know, you get more of his words. You don't really get as much of his words. It's really just him, you know, just talking about the lawyer and all this shit. Whereas like in Fear and Loathing, it really captures the spirit of that time period and what Hunter S. Thompson went through, and you know the failure of the '60s and just his whole critique of that, and that is why this round goes to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because it does more to like put you in that world, and it really like it navigates you in a way that like no other film has before, you know, and the amount of pandemonium, even the side characters like Ellen Barkin is that waitress, Cameron Diaz is the news reporter chick, and Mark Harmon is that magazine reporter guy, and you know you get Flea, Lyle Lovett, you selling the acid, like I mean Jesus Jones, the list just goes on and on. But the real shining star though of the side characters is Gary Busey, is that fucking highway patrolman, like this is just like I said, Terry Gilliam, one of the greatest directors of all time, and this is one of his best. This is like a masterclass in how to make off the wall gonzo filmmaking, if you will. And I think it's a better representation of what Hunter S. Thompson was and what he went through, as where like, you know, Where the Buffalo Roam is a good start. And it's kind of like Fear and Loathing kind of finished that. So this round goes to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. For anybody keeping score, that is 65 to 53. The 70s are up by 12 now. The 90s took this round, you know, they keep coming back, but that lead is still steady for the 70s, you know. But they're only up by 12 now, so who knows, the 90s could come back. You know, it's kind of, you know, one of those things. There's a lot of layers too in Fear and Loathing, you know, about, you know, drug use, drug culture, and a society that condemns it, and also like, you know, just doesn't fully understand anything, doesn't want to understand anything. Because, you know, think about it, if you had more drug education and got more people on the drugs they need to be on, as opposed to the pharmaceuticals and all this shit, you know, and maybe think about it, if weed and cocaine were legal, you know, that how much money these people would be making, you know. I thought this was capitalism, you know. But you know, for all the shit the 60s did, it was often for naught, because the 70s they tried to retain it, but by the end of the 70s going into the 80s it just died off. And then, you know, the 90s slowly tried to bring it back, you know, because of course that was the decade of 70s nostalgia. That's why like something like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was perfect to be made in the 90s, because they had a better understanding of it. But you know, once those planes hit those towers in 2001, shit was never the same after that. You know, I agree kind of with Hunter S. Thompson. You know, it still hasn't gotten weird enough for me yet, because, you know, even in the most batshit crazy times that we're in now, you know, not a whole lot of shit makes sense, but here we are. It still hasn't gotten weird enough for me yet. And these matchups will continue to come. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is all open for debate. I really don't give a fuck at this point. This is all a self-indulgent journey to see which decade was better for filmmaking. And for all you film professors out there, any of you, or maybe even sociology professors that want to get in on this shit, let's talk compensation, you know, because nobody works for free. This is a fucking gonzo YouTube is what this shit is. None of this is meant to make sense unless you want it to make sense, you know. Drop out, tune in. This shit still hasn't gotten weird enough for me yet.